Windows 10 and Windows 11. What impact does upgrading have on performance? Well, we're about to find out. Today we'll be speed testing Windows 10 and starting things off with the startup test. I wanted to take this time to explain what hardware we're working with because it has changed from my previous videos. We're using a Dell Latitude 7390 with an i5-8350U CPU with integrated graphics, 8 gigs of RAM, and this time we're using 128 gigs of SSD storage. This was all mainly done to supplement Windows 11 system requirements, so we're making this as fair as possible. Anyways, back to the comparison. Windows 10 does take the win here. However, Windows 11 was not too far behind. As always, startup doesn't determine everything, but it can give us a rough idea of what to expect. Quick look at how much storage both operating systems take up with the same pre-installed programs. Windows 10 takes up exactly 40 gigabytes of storage, while Windows 11 takes up 41.1 gigabytes, giving Windows 10 the win here by a mere 1.1 gigabytes. Moving on to memory management, I tested this in two ways. It took up 2.6 gigabytes of RAM, while Windows 11 took up 3.1 gigabytes. That's a 500 megabyte difference, and this can be especially significant if you don't have that much RAM in the first. Windows 10 got to 24 tabs and Windows 11 got to 20 tabs, another win for Windows 10. Next up is the battery test. Here I just ran a bunch of programs in the background that would drain the battery as quickly as possible. Speeding things up here, remember both were unplugged at almost the exact same time. Windows 10 takes the win here once again. Windows 11 falling short by just a minute and a half. If you're curious, I've also provided the total amount of time it took for both machines to die. Remember, this was a highly intensive battery test, so I'd imagine in the real world, the scale would be even larger. I wanted to do a variety of different applications for this section, starting off with a classic Windows application control panel. Windows 10 does come in first and Windows 11 comes in about a half second later. Let's also try Windows settings, which is a modern Windows application, and once again, Windows 10 comes out on top with Windows 11 having a similar delay to control panel. Let's do something a bit heavier, Microsoft Word 2019. This application has very long loading times, but nevertheless, Windows 10 loads up the entire application first, but Windows 11 wasn't too far behind considering how long it usually takes to load Word. Let's move away from Microsoft for a little bit and try opening a PDF file with Adobe Reader, and similar results, Windows 10 comes in first with a small gap in Windows 11. Finally, let's try opening a video file via VLC Media Player, and surprise, surprise, Windows 10 opens before Windows 11 with a small delay. That's kind of funny actually. Windows 10 opened every single application before Windows 11, and the small gap between both was almost the exact same for every application. What a coincidence. And I know this isn't entirely OS dependent, but I wanted to quickly do a web page loading test with 3 websites. First was youtube.com, and Windows 11 fully loads the entire website first with about a half-second delay on Windows 10. This was then followed by apple.com, where Windows 11 takes the win here as well. Again, Windows 10 having this half-second delay. Finally was google.com, and they pretty much loaded them at almost the exact same time. Maybe Windows 10 came in a millisecond or two earlier. Okay, well, let's try something else. Something like file transfer. I loaded a USB flash drive with about a 4 gigabyte file and tried copying it over to the desktop of both OSs. Speeding things along here, Windows 11 finishes copying everything over first, and around 10 seconds later, Windows 10 finishes up doing the same thing. Just like before, here's the total amount of copying time for both operating systems if you're interested. Finally, before we get to the benchmarks, we've got a virus scanning test. I'll admit I did run into some issues with this test in particular, and I had to do some reinstallations of Malwarebytes, which is the software we're using, so just keep that in mind. It won't be as accurate as the other tests. Nevertheless, after the scan was run at the same time on both operating systems, Windows 11 completes the entire thing first, Windows 10 needing around 21 more seconds to complete the test, so there you go. Menu, Microsoft did a complete redesign. Pinned apps moved from the right side to the top half, and live tiles are now gone and are replaced with static icons in a grid. The search bar is now located in the start menu rather than being part of the taskbar, and those little side panel shortcuts that were on the left side are now at the bottom. And here's something not present in the Windows 10 start menu at all, and that's the new recommended section, and it shows recently used programs and files, which by the way, are also synced with OneDrive. Think of this as a much more simplified version of the timeline feature found in Windows 10's task viewer. The All Apps list, which was on the left side of the start menu in Windows 10, is now its own menu in Windows 11, using a button. And within the All Apps list, some older programs like Windows Explorer and Notepad are now part of the list rather than being part of the Windows System or Windows Accessories folder within the list. In fact, those folders are now completely removed and replaced with a shortcut to Control Panel called Windows Tools that lists many legacy built-in Windows programs that were previously in those folders. Moving on to changes in the taskbar, we see a lot of differences. The icons went from being left aligned to centered, although there is a setting to revert this, and if you look closely, the taskbar is also slightly taller in Windows 11. Hard to notice, but it is there. The UI for active and idle programs has been changed. It's now indicated by the color and length of a little line in the taskbar icon with a transparent rounded square around a program when active. The animation in the taskbar for apps that are doing certain actions have been redesigned. For example, here are both animations for downloading or installing something, and here are both animations for apps that need your attention, like the user account control prompt. There are now bouncy icon animations when you open or close programs. Badges on apps have gone a little redesign. If you hover over the search or task view icon, you'll get quick little actions you can do without needing to click the icon. The start button no longer changes color based on your action. Here's just general UI changes. So starting off, say goodbye to the sharp corners in Windows 10 and say hello to the rounded corners in Windows 11. And this is no understatement. Every single element in Windows 11 is now round, even the very old stuff. There are now new animations for opening, minimizing, and maximizing a window. Windows 10 went for more of a fade approach, while in Windows 11, the animation has a lot more resizing and fluidity action going on. Almost every single icon in Windows 11 has been redesigned to stay consistent with its modern design language. Some elements of this were present in Windows 10, however now it's everywhere, even in legacy areas like the control panel. As with every modern version of Windows, there's a new wallpaper. Previously, there was the old hero wallpaper, which was light shining out of a Windows logo, and now the background is much like a blue bloom, if that makes any sense. Microsoft also introduced new themes. Previously in Windows 10, there were 4 themes to choose from by default. Now there are 6. Light mode is also now the new default theme for Windows 11 rather than the hybrid of a dark taskbar and light apps in Windows 10. The Windows logo has gone through a redesign. It now resembles the Microsoft logo a lot more. The lock screen has gone through some changes, but it's pretty underwhelming. To sum it up, elements of the lock screen have now been centered and the quick status is now removed. You can only show one app that shows detailed status. Windows 11 now introduces a new blur effect called I'm gonna mispronounce this, Segoe UI variable, which is Microsoft's modified version of the previous Segoe UI font found in Windows 10. To paraphrase, Microsoft basically says this is a more pleasing and easier font to read. The screen with the spinning logo when signing in or out, doing updates, restarting and stuff like that now only shows a black background, unlike Windows 10 where it takes your accent color and sets that as the color of the background. Similarly, depending on whether you're using the dark or light mode, opening apps with splash screens will only show a black or white background in Windows 11, rather than conforming to the color of the background with the accent color in Windows 10. Context menus throughout Windows 11 have now been updated to look more modern. However, there is still an option within the context menu called Show More Options that allows you to see the old one that is seen in Windows 10 if you need it for some reason. Alert boxes for things like changing display settings and low battery alerts now have a complete redesign in Windows 11. Unlike Windows 10, Windows 11 now has a colored line at the bottom of some text boxes. Finally, in Windows 11 sign-in screen, the text box is now dark instead of white in Windows 10, and the enter arrow looks like it's part of the text box rather than being on its own in Windows 10. In terms of system sounds, Windows 11 actually has different sounds between its dark mode and light mode. In dark mode, the sounds are a lot more echoed and muted, whereas in light mode, they are more clear and less echoed. It's actually very interesting. Here's a direct comparison of the sounds in Windows 10, Windows 11, and Windows 11's dark mode. A few things to note about Windows Update. Firstly, the text that is shown when updating the operating system during a restart has been changed. Windows 10 basically tells you exactly what's going on, while Windows 11 just tries to use more natural language. Secondly, Windows Update will now show the estimated amount of time needed to complete updates. And finally, let's talk about feature updates. In Windows 10, Microsoft was committed to releasing a feature update twice a year. That is now changing because in Windows 11, you'll only get one feature update a year instead of 2. So hopefully you can now decide whether to upgrade to Windows 11. Let's talk about the different experiences you'll get setting up both versions of Windows. The setup screen on Windows 11 has been completely redone. In Windows 10, the setup screen was dark blue and black with fade animations when navigating through the setup. In Windows 11, there are now more vibrant colors and blurs, new animations, new icons, new loading screens, and other various improvements. Cortana used to be a big part of the Windows 10 setup experience, however, say goodbye to her because she is no longer part of the setup experience in Windows 11. The steps you go through to set up Windows hasn't changed much between both versions. The only new step added in Windows 11 is the ability to name the computer, which was actually not a thing in Windows 10. After finishing setup, you'll be greeted with some text and animation on both OSs while Windows is getting your desktop ready. Not only is the text different during this process, but the background has also had a visual overhaul. In Windows 10, the background was constantly changing between different colors, while in Windows 11, a blurry bluish purple round light constantly moves around the background. And an interesting little find when the is not only an area that shows the toggles found at the bottom of the Action Center in Windows 10, but it now also shows the new place for your volume, brightness, and even your Wi-Fi controls. In Windows 10, all three of those were in separate menus. Now, if you click, let's say, the network icon in the system tray, it won't take you to a separate network flyout, it will now take you to the entire quick settings menu instead. This menu can also be accessed using the Windows A shortcut on your keyboard, which is the same shortcut that opens the Action Center in Windows 10. The other menu is the notifications menu, which is now part of the calendar. Now the notifications are found above the calendar instead of within Action Center, and not only are the notifications round, but they're also no longer inside a bar like it was in Windows 10. You also have a shortcut to Focus's settings in the Settings app. This menu can also be accessed using the Windows N shortcut on your keyboard. And if you're curious about what's changed about the calendar, you'll be pretty disappointed. It has absolutely no integration with anything, and the detailed clock that showed seconds is also gone. All it shows is the day, and that's about it. Luckily, you can minimize the calendar within the notifications menu if you don't want to see it. And here's a little comparison of the newsfeed in Windows 10 and the widgets panel in Windows 11. Now, don't be fooled, these are pretty much almost the exact same thing, they just look different and are found in different areas of Windows. The newsfeed is found near the system tray, and the widgets panel is accessed via a taskbar icon or by using the Windows W shortcut on your keyboard. Last thing to note is that the newsfeed is customized using Microsoft Edge, while the widgets panel is partially customized within the panel, partially through Microsoft Edge as well. Microsoft has also made a number of changes to Snap Assist and multitasking features. Starting off, the task viewer has now been simplified in Windows 11, and the timeline feature that is found in Windows 10 has now been removed. You can now choose a different wallpaper for each virtual desktop in Windows 11, rather than only one for every single one in Windows 10. The Snap Assist preview now has a frosted glass look rather than the transparent glass in Windows 10. The animation when you actually preview and snap a window has been changed. Funnily enough, Windows 10 doesn't even have an animation when you snap the window. And generally speaking, Snap Assist is just much smarter and is able to do more than it used to in Windows 10. So, for example, when snapping a window in a quadrant, Windows 11 will try and assist you in finding other windows, while in Windows 10, snapping to a quadrant does nothing. When using Snap Assist to snap different windows on different parts of the screen, Windows will now automatically sort those windows into a group, and those groups can now be previewed and opened in the taskbar. Windows 10 doesn't have this feature, so groups don't show up when hovering on a taskbar icon. The line seen when resizing apps side by side now has a new look. When you're actually using it, it disappears in Windows 11 while still being present in Windows 10. Here's a look at differences in built-in programs and apps. Now, many of the applications in Windows 11 have been updated and more updates are to come even after its release. However, because there are just so many to cover in one video, here are just the biggest highlights. Starting with File Explorer, there have been various UI changes. There is now a replacement to the ribbon UI found at the top of the File Explorer, which tries to simplify and get rid of all of the clutter that was the old ribbon UI. It'll also have less spaced out icons by default, which can be reverted if you don't like that, and 3D Objects is no longer its own dedicated folder. The Settings app has gone a complete overhaul. It's now supposed to be easier to navigate, more organized, and overall just look better. You'll see more enlarged icons and pictures that make the UI easier to use, and even some new animations. And just like the Settings app, the Microsoft Store is also getting a huge revamp with a new UI and various improvements. However, one of the best parts is that the store is now open to accepting more app types, such as EWA, which are web apps, Win32, which are like the .exe installers, even Android apps, though support for those will be delayed. This app is also coming to Windows 10, which is a huge bonus. Skype, which was preloaded in Windows 10, has now been removed in favor of the Microsoft Teams integration system built into Windows 11. However, you can still install Skype again if you really need it. Internet Explorer is finally disabled from Windows 11. You can try, it is nowhere to be found, so your only option is Microsoft Edge. It's still there in Windows 10, but not on Windows 11. Microsoft has also done a lot to make sure Windows 11 is consistent and removing duplicate Windows accessories that were present in Windows 10. So, what they're basically doing is they're updating a legacy Windows accessory and removing the duplicate version. For example, Snip and Sketch has been removed and a newly updated snipping tool is now here with a more modern UI and various features from Snip and Sketch. This is also going to be done with Paint in the future, where Paint 3D is removed by default and the old MS Paint is going to be updated not only with a new look, but with new features as well. Windows Terminal is now a preloaded application in Windows 11 and aims to unify command prompt, PowerShell, and other command lines into just one app. Alarms and Clock is now just called Clock and has a new feature called Focus Sessions aimed to help people pace themselves to reach their goals. And aside from other little updates to apps, pretty much all the built-in Windows applications have been and will be updated with Windows 11's new design language, including rounded corners and new blur effects. Here's a quick rundown of preloaded apps on one OS that are not there by default on the other, and these are apps that I haven't mentioned yet. 3D Viewer, Math Info Panel, Mixed Reality Portal, OneNote for Windows 10, and the People app are all the preloaded exclusives on Windows 10, while Get Started, Microsoft News, and Microsoft To Do are the preloaded exclusives on Windows 11. All of these can still be installed through the Microsoft Store on both OSs, except for Math Input Panel, the People Wi-Fi speed test using speedtest.net. Instead of taking the best of 10 tests, which is what I did in my previous comparisons, I tested each operating system 5 times and averaged out the upload and download speed on both. In terms of download speed, Windows 10 averaged to 88.078 megabits per second, and Windows 11 averaged to 93.692 megabits per second, giving Windows 11 the win here. However, testing the upload speed was a completely different story. Windows 10 scored 88.784 megabits per second, while Windows 11 performed worse at 80.438 megabits per second. Pretty strange. Alright, now let's move on to something more graphics intensive, starting with Cinebench, a very heavy benchmark especially for this hardware. After running the single core benchmark on both operating systems, Windows 10 loses out here by scoring a 439 compared to the higher 450 that Windows 11 scores. However, multi-core score was a different story. Windows 10 receives a 2033 versus 2003 on Windows 11, a 30-point difference. Last benchmark before we get to conclusions is superposition. This benchmark was offered in multiple different resolutions and graphical effects, so first let's cover it when it's run at 720p low graphics. Windows 10 scores an 1892 and Windows 11 beats it out with a 1943. I also repeated the same benchmark with 1080p medium settings, and Windows 10 loses again with a 675 versus the 694 on Windows 11. And that's all the benchmarks. Let's try and make a reasonable conclusion out of this. Just either outperform or does just as well as Windows 11 in the majority of my tests, but I'm sticking to my same old statement. Don't choose an operating system solely for its performance. First priority should be its features and reliability.